In the previous video, I briefly talked about the relationship between poverty and war. Now, let's explore the relationship in depth between poverty and war. Hi, I'm Hugo, and I love researching into extraordinary topics. Let's discuss the negative feedback of war and poverty. Following up on the previous video, the poverty and conflict page on the GSDRC Applied Knowledge Services website mentions that when a war occurs, the war hurts the poor the most by depleting social welfare aimed to supporting those in need, obliterating infrastructure in rural areas, and pulling back security to protect the elites. This creates poverty and thus hurts both people and their opportunities to rise both economically and socially, which can create an environment for more war to happen. In the end, this all leads to a situation deemed the conflict trap. That is a situation where a nation-state with a long-term cycle of war and poverty essentially continues with that negative feedback loop to the point of not just destabilizing itself through constant civil wars and unrest, but through destabilizing its neighbors. This is why a Borgen magazine story titled War and Poverty, Looking Back at the Balkans History says countries involved in wars suffer great economic hardships, leaving people in poverty for years thereafter. As a result of war and conflict, inflation occurs and jobs become scarce. Healthcare becomes inadequate and taxes increase as national debts increase due to the costs of war. Civil war can be especially damaging to countries. The traumatic impacts of war on the citizens make a difficult economic situation even more devastating when people are left to try to piece their lives back together after experiencing violence, deaths, and displacement. Thus, war and poverty are an unfortunate, tragic, and horrifying marriage of two very dark concepts, which destroys national economies, infrastructure, and most importantly, people's lives. The relationship between war and poverty must not be underestimated at any cost, and that all must be done to prevent either from happening. So, what can be done to break this horrible war and poverty relationship? That question is being tested now with the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine. According to a Global Citizens article, How War Fuels Poverty, rebuilding after war is difficult and is extremely hard because, among many things, the victims of the war, civilians are, to say the least, traumatized by the events of the war. Although reconciliation efforts to make peace between former enemies can be a path to breaking the cycle of war and poverty, the only way to break this negative feedback loop can be found through global solidarity, financial support, and a commitment to peace. This coincides with what the GSDRC Applied Knowledge Services article says, where the article mentions that the international community's response to reconstructing a nation-state after a war has the potential to support a phoenix effect by rebuilding infrastructure, strengthening economic growth, and more. Also, it is important to mention that even when communities are rattled by war, local communities are generally resilient in rebuilding trust and engaging in community activities after the war is over. Hence, the cycle between war and poverty can be broken, but only with the complete, robust determination of the international community and local governments. The most effective way to break this cycle of war and poverty is to facilitate an environment for peace through rebuilding roads, homes, livelihoods, and supporting everyone affected by the war, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. So, to recap, the war-poverty relationship must not be underestimated, as the marriage between the two horrible concepts destroys nation-states and lives. However, this relationship can be broken with the robust determination of the combined resolve of the international community and local governments. Although war and poverty can create a negative feedback loop, we have the opportunity to break the negative feedback loop, to form a positive feedback loop of peace. As such, due to these reasons, I would like to encourage you to set an example by advocating for peace instead of war, and working to create that environment for peace to occur instead of lashing out in the name of war, which burns bridges and builds walls. Thank you for watching my video, and merci et à bientôt.